Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this important session today. My name is Lacey Stone, and I serve as the Chief Development Officer at USA for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency. I'm so delighted to have the opportunity to moderate a timely and essential discussion today. If you do have questions during our webinar, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and somebody from our USA for UNHCR team will follow up with you directly. But let's go ahead and dive right in. To start, I just want to share a bit of background or context. And that starts with, for more than 70 years, UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, has been a lifeline for millions of people forced to flee their homes because of conflict and persecution. And protection is the heart of UNHCR's mission. What that means is ensuring that refugees and other people who have been forced to flee are safe and their basic human rights are respected. Whether someone is a refugee, an asylum seeker, a stateless person, or displaced within their own country, UNHCR works to help people forced to flee conflict and persecution to find safety, dignity, and hope. Currently, there are more than 117 million people worldwide who have been forced to flee persecution, conflict, violence, and human rights violations. We've witnessed a decade of year-over-year increases to the number of people forced to flee, with conflict being that main driver of displacement. For today's discussion, I'm going to be joined by a few dear colleagues from UNHCR as we take a closer look at two urgent humanitarian crises. First, we'll focus on Sudan. Now in its third year, the crisis in Sudan remains the largest displacement situation globally. Over 900 days of brutal fighting, widespread violations of human rights, famine, and the breakdown of life-sustaining services have pushed millions to the brink of survival, particularly women and children. Deadly conflict has forced more than 13 million people to flee their homes, and more than 30 million people are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. We'll then turn to Ukraine, where since Russia's full-scale invasion began in February of 2022, millions of refugees from Ukraine have crossed borders into neighboring countries, and millions more have been forced to flee within the country. Unprecedented civilian casualties and the destruction of vital infrastructure have forced millions of people to flee their homes, seeking safety, protection, and assistance. But despite extremely challenging conditions, UNHCR continues to provide essential support. That's protection, shelter, education, safe spaces, social services, legal aid, and psychosocial care. And they also work to reunite families, advocate for safe passage, and ensure survivors of violence receive the care that they need. So I am beyond thrilled to first introduce Dana Michelle Hughes, who serves as Head of Communications for Eastern and Southern Africa at UNHCR, who will spotlight UNHCR's life-saving work supporting Sudanese refugees. So Dana, welcome to you. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll now turn it over to you to kindly share your perspective on UNHCR's critical protection work in Sudan. Over to you, Dana.
Thank you so much, Lacey, and thank you to everyone that's joined. Right before this, I was telling Lacey and colleagues that I'm sure you guys are all looking at the headlines, and even when I first prepared this presentation last week, seemingly the situation has gotten so much worse, and I'm sure you've seen all of the headlines about El Fasher. But before I get into that, I'd like to just give you an update on the emergency in general. Can we go to the next slide? So the Sudan emergency is the largest displacement crisis in the world right now. And many people say arguably one of the worst humanitarian and protection crises that we're seeing. And as I said, that's only gotten worse in the last week. Can we go to the next slide? So I'm going to give you Sudan by the numbers, and this is why it's the largest crisis and largest displacement crisis in the world. Since 2023, when the war started, more than 12 million people have been forced to flee. Actually, 14 million people have been forced to flee, with 12 million still in exile. 4 million people have fled to 7 different countries. Some of them are neighboring, and some are as far afield as Uganda. And it doesn't say here, but also Europe. Think about this: 1 out of every 3 Sudanese people in the world are displaced. 1 out of every 6 internally displaced person globally comes from Sudan. 1 in 13 refugees in the world are from Sudan. And the majority of those that have fled are in Chad and Egypt, putting a lot of strain on those countries, in particular Chad, which is also one of the poorest countries in the world, but continues to welcome refugees. In less than 2 years, in just over 2 years, Chad has welcomed 850,000 Sudanese refugees across its border. And I think you can just imagine what that does sort of to a society, and how much a stretch on resources that is when there aren't that many to begin with. At the same time, Sudan's an interesting situation because there are parts of it that have become that where the fighting has largely ceased. And we've seen about 472,000 Sudanese refugees returning mostly to Khartoum in those areas. But, after 2.5 years of war, those areas are just completely destroyed. Uh, I've seen pictures, and colleagues really talk about just utter destruction, lack of clean water, lack of infrastructure, no power. So, they're coming back to rebuild their lives, and finding that the homes they left no longer exist. And so with that, there's only 21% of the funding that's required to help refugees for the Sudan situation has been given this year, and we're already in November. It means that, to be honest, we've had to make some really hard choices. It means not moving refugees from insecure borders, and not like a few refugees here or there. We're talking hundreds of thousands of refugees from insecure borders to safer areas inland because we don't have the money. It means refugees are going without food. It means they're going without clean water. We have just come through a really terrible cholera outbreak. And part of that was just because people are in overcrowded places and there's no funding for proper sanitation. And I added this just in the last week. Over 70,000 people have fled violence in Al Fashir, Darfur. They fled to this area, to Wheela, where, we're seeing horrific stories of human rights violations. And again, they're fleeing to places where, the humanitarian funding appeal for Sudan is only 27% funded, and that was before this latest escalation of violence. So this is the numbers, and I've already given you a bit of a preview. If we can go to the next slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's beyond the numbers. So the reality is, as Lacey said, 3 years onward, it's so sad, but we are no closer to peace than we were. We continue to call for a ceasefire, but in the meantime, the Sudanese people are really the ones that are continuing to bear the heavy cost of the fighting. And more people are expected to flee in Al Fasher in the coming days and weeks. Chad, which already hosts 850,000 Sudanese refugees from this conflict, and that's on top of 400,000 Sudanese refugees that were living there that had been there really since the last conflict and issues in Darfur. And, right now we haven't seen a huge influx, but the sad part about that is part of it is because, if you've been watching the news, it's really difficult for people to be able to flee. We're hearing stories, and our colleagues on the ground working in Tawila, where a lot of these people are fleeing to, of not making it, of both targeted and indiscriminate killings, particularly of young men and boys, of horrific sexual violence against women and girls. And so we're not seeing a large number of people that have fled to Chad just yet in this week, but we expect that there will be more. But the fact that there hasn't also means that the safe passage, the targeting of civilians is really at an acceptable level. And so, yes, as I just said, they're escaping the fighting and terror. They've navigated armed checkpoints, extortion, arrests, looting, and harassment. And the reality is, the humanitarian and protection crisis in Sudan is rapidly spiraling. Um, in terms of those that are still returning in the other part of Sudan, Khartoum, it's a fragile but hopeful shift. But again, um, it's a country that remains very fluid, and everyone needs help everywhere. The truth is, I wish I had a more eloquent way of putting it, but that's just the reality. That it's really unfortunate because you have sort of warring parties, and the people that are really paying the price are the ones that have nothing to do with what's going on. And one other thing I want to make a point of, because we are the refugee agency, is that a lot of people don't realize this, but Sudan continues to host nearly 900,000 refugees and asylum seekers from mostly from neighboring South Sudan, from Ethiopia and Eritrea. And, these are people that fled conflict in their own country. Some of them, many of them, had lived in Sudan more or less peacefully for a number of years, sometimes decades. And now they find themselves forced to flee again. And, when the country is in such flux and when Sudanese are really suffering, we're finding at UNHCR that we really have to remind Sudanese officials when we can, and everyone else, that these refugees can't be forgotten. They find themselves slipping through the cracks. And again, as I said in the slide, I think I said it more eloquently, but the humanitarian needs, they're enormous and they're growing. And at the same time, we're seeing a trend where the funding is shrinking. And it's really a losing equation. And the people that are losing are the millions of displaced Sudanese. Um, it's really easy to talk about the numbers, 12 million here, 3 million, 4 million there. But I want to show you a video of an internally displaced teenager that really touched me. Her name is sorry. Before I did that, we can go back. Sorry about that. This is just because we'll share the presentation. If you wanted an idea of the profile of where people are going and where they're going, this just gives you some grounding of all the countries that border Sudan. And actually, I want to just say quickly, a lot of times we hear, especially from Americans and Europeans, but it's so far away. Why should we care? Not just about humanity, but it's also about regional stability. If you look at this map, look at the countries that border Sudan: Egypt, Libya, Chad, Central African Republic, South Sudan, Ethiopia. A lot of these countries either are um, have just gotten out of conflicts and instability themselves, um, or are in the midst of a different kind of instability. So it's not just Sudan that's at stake. It's really a region, and it's a region that has global security significance for everyone. And so now we can go to the video um, with this beautiful young girl, young teenager that really has touched me and continues to stay with me. And I would like for you to watch the video, because the thing that I like about it is that I don't want to be the spoiler, but if you have teenagers or of teenagers, I think you'll watch this and you'll be able to relate to what one of her passions are. if you can play.
أنا بالذات ما قادرة أشوفه أو ما قادرة أعبر عنه لأنه كده تلاشى حاجة زي دي. أقدر أعبر عن المستقبل حاليا في الوضع الحالي، لكن لو كنت أنا إسلام زمان كان ممكن أوريك المستقبل يعني شنو. هكمل قرايتي، همشي كوريا، حلاقي أعضاء BTS. حاليا ما أقدر أقول لك كده. دخلت جوجل كتبت BTS، عرفت حتى يعني حياتهم والحاجات اللي مروا بها ممكن أشبهها مع حياتي في حاجة بسيطة كده، لأنه برضه هو مر بصعوبات حتى بقوا مشاهير وكده. طبعا كلهم فرقة كورية، فهو يعني كده بيضغطوا نفسهم عشان يقدروا يتكلموا إنجليزي أو يتعلموا إنجليزي، فدي كانت حاجة بتجمعنا مع BTS. يعني السيتويشن بتاع الناس الريفيوجيز اللي قاعدين هنا صعب شديد، حاجة يعني ما ممكن الواحد يعبر عنها بالكلام، لا الواحد لازم يشوفها ويجربها ويعيشها. I don't know. حياتنا في الخرطوم كانت حلوة، حاسة إنه أموري حتظبط، ما مشكلة، ممكن ننتظر حبة ما نشت. بس.
So I really wanted to show that video, and her story is one of my favorites. Sadly, she's still living in displacement. That was shot about a year ago. But she still is hopeful. And the reason why I really love that story, and Islam continues to touch me is because I have a preteen daughter who loves K-pop. And when you watch it, and when we sat down and when we really interviewed her, not everything made it into the story, but the reason why we featured her is because when we asked, what are the things you miss most about home? And you expected her to say, my bed, or food, and, water, having these things. And she, like any teenager anywhere in the world, said, I miss my BTS collection. I miss the normality. I miss being able to go on the internet and keep up with their lives. Um, and there's just something so universal about that. And I think with the Sudan conflict, because it seems so far away, and because there's a history of conflict, it gets easy to look at the numbers and for people to not see themselves in these refugees. But I'm so happy to talk to you today, because I hope that I've helped you to understand that beyond all the horror and the numbers, there are kids and parents like you and me who really just want peace and want to go home, and deserve to live in dignity while they hopefully await the chance to rebuild their lives. Thank you, Lacey.
Thank you so much, Dana. Really appreciate you sharing these impactful stories. I think we have time for a couple of questions. So I wanted to ask, I started the webinar today talking about protection being the core of UNHCR's mission. And I think that protection as a concept really does cover so many different aspects of UNHCR's work. So I'm hoping you can help us, Dana, to really understand when we talk about protection at UNHCR, what does that really mean in practice for somebody who has just fled their home? How does UNHCR show up in that moment?
So that's so interesting because when you talk about protection, people think it means security, but that's not really what it means. Look, I'll be honest, I joined UNHCR about 9 years ago, and for about a year, I didn't quite understand it either. And someone explained it to me that it's like you're an agent for refugees. It's like you're a consular officer. When you flee, you don't have a state. There's no government to necessarily take care of you, to help you with your basic necessities. Just starting with just having you come into the country and have legal rights as a refugee. The refugee, it's a legal term that if you fled because of conflict, war, persecution, you have the right to, you have certain legal rights. So the first thing UNHCR does is make sure that you can be recognized as a refugee. And that's so important, that sort of registration, because that's what then allows you to get the assistance that you need to survive, really, when you're going someplace, that it allows you to get food assistance, water. The first thing that we do is to give, kitchen sets, mats, shelter, basic things you need to survive. And then beyond that, it means providing you with counseling if you've been traumatized, if we can, right? If we have the funding for it. It means helping set you up to be able to try to get an education. It means advocating with government so you can get an education. And so it's the basic life-saving assistance. What I'd say quickly is that UNHCR's motto is that we help people live in safety. We're a protection agency that helps the displaced live in safety and in dignity. The safety part is the life-saving assistance. The dignity is the advocacy to help you remember that being a refugee is not who you are, it's your circumstance.
Dana, thank you so much for sharing that perspective. I think that really sheds light on what it means in practicality for UNHCR to protect. I have just one more question before we transition over to our colleagues in Ukraine. Dana, you shared some sobering statistics. You also shared some really great stories of what this means for folks who are in Sudan. What keeps you hopeful in the face of such immense challenges right now?
Oh, I think I always look for the light, for the good. Um, so what keeps me hopeful is the human potential, right? That I really believe that and that's why I was a journalist for a number of years, with ABC News actually, and even in Africa. And from that job and from when I joined UNHCR, I think I truly believe that we have more in common as humans than we don't have in common.
Mm.
And that the best way to do that is to really boil it down to an individual. So Islam gives me hope, hearing her and seeing how she has hope. I didn't show this story, but I can tell it very quickly. In Uganda, there's a young man who was Sudanese, and we met him, and he was a pharmacist in Khartoum. And he's now in Uganda, and he's volunteering, and he's studying to become a pharmacist. And the community sees what he's able to do. So, for me, I also feel like I can't afford to not have hope, right? I don't have the option to be hopeless. If the refugees that we meet every day, if the refugees who are working hard to try to rebuild their lives, and wake up every day and stay motivated, who am I to not have hope in humanity?
Wow, Dana, thank you so much. That perspective is extraordinary and something that quite literally gave me chills, and I will be taking that with me. So thank you as well. I really appreciate your insights today, and we'll bring you back at the end. But for now, I'm going to transition over to another colleague, Pauline Hilmy, who is UNHCR's Ukraine Senior Community-Based Protection Officer. And Pauline is going to be speaking about how UNHCR protects internally displaced people and other war-affected populations in Ukraine. So I will now turn it over to Pauline. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, colleagues. Good evening for us here in Ukraine. Thank you, Lacey, and thanks to everyone who has joined us today for this webinar. So my name is Pauline, and I am the Senior Protection Officer with UNHCR based in Dnipro, based in Eastern Ukraine. Today, I will share with you an overview of the situation, and then my colleague, Victoria, will be speaking with a Ukrainian woman whose home was impacted by a missile strike in October of 2024. Next slide, please. So we are now more than 3 years into Russia's full-scale war in Ukraine. Millions of people have lost everything, were forced to flee due to shelling, drones, missiles, occupation, and countless lives have been uprooted, homes and belongings destroyed, social support and services have been disrupted. Around 12.7 million people are in need in Ukraine, including 3.8 million who are internally displaced within the country. On this slide, I just want to show you a map that takes us back to February 2022, before the start of the full-scale invasion. On this map, you can see shaded in red the area that was already occupied by Russia before the full-scale invasion. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide, please. And so to zoom in now on the current situation. So as you know, many regions in eastern Ukraine have been partially or fully occupied. The map here, if you look at the yellow line and the red line, this is to show the advances of the front line since last year, over the past 12 months alone. So the yellow line shows where the front line was in October of 2024, and the red line is where it is currently now in October of this year. So the front line continues to advance. And people also continue to flee. We have a lot of new displacement happening, coming from frontline areas. And as the frontline approaches, the authorities announce evacuation orders for people in villages and towns to get out before the Russian forces arrive. On this map, you can see the small red triangles. These are villages and towns where over the past few months, evacuation orders were announced. Next slide, please. We experience frequent aerial attacks across the country, drones, missiles. This is affecting not only the areas near the front line, but across all of Ukraine, including big cities such as Kyiv. And now, as we prepare for the fourth winter since the full-scale invasion, Russian aerial attacks have started to really focus also on energy infrastructure. I'm sure you've seen this in the news over the past few weeks. For example, here in Dnipro, on a daily basis, we experience power cuts lasting a few hours, and we're bracing ourselves for a very difficult winter to come. The recent attacks have also knocked out around 60% of Ukraine's gas production capacity, and there are very severe concerns that households may go without sufficient heating this winter. And as you know, in Ukraine, we can face freezing temperatures that go on for months. Next slide, please. In frontline communities, those who remain face very severe peril. And we often see older persons or persons with disabilities sometimes being the last to leave or may be unable to flee without support. These are just some images of frontline communities. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, new displacement continues and continues to increase. Since the beginning of this year alone, more than 130,000 people were newly displaced within Ukraine, the majority of them, around 100,000, coming from the Donetsk region. You may remember from the map, Donetsk is where the most significant frontline advancement has been observed this year. People flee on their own or sometimes through transportation, which is organized by the government, by authorities, or through support also of humanitarian actors. And people, when they flee, often transit through a network of centers in the country, transit centers, before they make their way onward to final destinations. And here you can see in the photo on the left, people waiting for the train to take them onward to safer areas in Western Ukraine. And on the right, this is a transit center located not far from Dnipro, where people have just arrived to register. Next slide, please. Many people flee with very few or no belongings at all. They may have lost their key vital documents, ID cards, passports. Their social support systems have been disrupted. They may have lost access to needed care services. Older people with disabilities are often the most vulnerable profiles and face very particular challenges and risks. Next slide, please. So through UNHCR's response in Ukraine, we support people by enabling them to find safety and by restoring what they have lost, which is their access to services and their access to rights. Through our protection response, we help those in frontline areas who are unable to flee by themselves through evacuation support, through the provision of transportation to help people get out of those frontline areas. We support people with legal aid to help them restore their documents or to obtain compensation. And legal aid is really a critical lifeline because without an ID document, people cannot access services. So we help people to access their pensions, social assistance, and other government services. We also support through the provision of psychosocial assistance to people who are suffering from trauma. The impact of the war on people's mental health is significant, whether during evacuation and displacement or after an attack. And psychosocial support is key to helping people cope with the mental toll of the war. We pay also particular attention to the needs of older people and people with disabilities who are among the most vulnerable and at risk. And in everything we do, we ensure that our work is complementing and strengthening the national systems of Ukraine, which are also robust. A cornerstone of our response is also our community-based protection work. We have a network of over 550 community-based organizations across the country who are led by displaced people themselves, but also women, minority groups, and who support their communities to build self-reliance, cohesion, and resilience. Just to share a couple of numbers, since the start of the full-scale invasion in 2022, more than 650,000 legal counseling sessions have been provided to people through UNHCR and its partners. More than 310,000 people have been supported with psychosocial support. And this year alone, we have assisted more than 430,000 people with protection information, counseling, and other assistance. So protection is really about people. We are here to support those who are most in need so that no one is left behind. Lacey, if I could ask you to go to the last slide, please. The last, yep. I'm going to hand over shortly to my colleague Victoria, but first wanted to show you here some images of a missile strike that happened in Dnipro city in October of 2024. This is the attack that affected Tamara, who we will meet shortly. And Tamara, as well as other residents of this area, were supported through psychosocial assistance, but also other basic supports, such as emergency shelter items, blankets, flashlights, and legal aid. So I will stop here. Thank you for your time and hand over now to my colleague, Victoria.
Hi, colleagues. Can you hear us? Yes? And
Yes,
can you see us?
Yes.
Thank you for confirming, because unfortunately, we now experience a power cut. This is our daily routine now in Ukraine, but we managed to connect. And thanks to Tamara today for her hospitality and that she agreed to talk to us. So I will briefly introduce Tamara. So she was affected in one of the attack happened last year in October. So a few days ago, that was almost an anniversary of that attack. And she was supported by UNHCR and its partner, local NGO, Proliska, and now Tamara will explain what happened to her and what services she received. Тамара Несторовна, добрый вечер. Спасибо вам большое, что вы сегодня уделили нам время. Если бы... Good evening, нужно сказать. Yeah, she's welcoming you and saying good evening. Если бы вы могли кратко рассказать, что с вами произошло в тот день, что случилось, как вы познакомились с нашим партнером Пролиской, какую помощь вы получили?
Это случилось, это была пятница, конец дня, уже было после 11 часов вечера, уже все легли спать, и это был момент, этот взрыв, да, он как раз вот как-то 20 метров всего расстояние этой волны, и волна ударила, конечно, вот это здание, все колыхнулось, мебель вся развернулась, упала на меня, вот стекла все полетели, я была, на мне 3 одеяла, все отопление мы еще не включали, и только я так ранена не была, вот, а только волосы за стекло и в ухо немножко влетело, вот. А так, ну, голова разбилась, потому что шкаф упал, вот, а этот шкаф упал на ногу, поэтому вот правая сторона у меня была, вот, а так.
Я переведу быстренько, хорошо?
Да.
So I will translate what she mentioned, that it happened in October last year. That was Friday. We were late at night at around 11 p.m. And basically the missile hit the area. It was just the yard, just 20 meters from Tamara's house. The house was shaken, and due to the blast wave, all the windows in her apartment was broken. And basically now we're sitting on the sofa where Tamara was sleeping that night, and she was showing that one of the wardrobe, due to the blast wave, it just covered her. She was not injured significantly, but of course she experienced some bruises and scratches on her body and on her face as well. И вот после этого всего, что произошло дальше? Куда вы...
Я не могла из-под мебели выбрать, потому что она меня к стенке сюда придавила, но потом сосед сверху пришел, шкаф поднял, я вылезла, ну что, все, вот. Ну, потом уже соседи попросили, поставили мебель на книжке, чтобы можно было Вот. Потому что приехала скорая, конечно, и ночью я пошла, у нас сразу тут на перекрестке в палатке была, пролеска была, и чуть не сказала менты, и полиция стояла. Вот. Они сначала, нет, пролески сначала не было в начале второго ночи. Вот. Они дали нам, привод, мне дали пленку, вот. А потом уже, когда пролеска, вот, надо было брать, ну, я не могла, это, вот, листы, в общем, они мне, ребята потом приехали, забили окна, потому что я сначала целлофаном забила, было очень холодно, вы потом перейдете. Вот. А потом ребята приехали, брезент, USB, да, дали мне теплое одеяло, фонарик дали, матрас заменили, потому что я выбросила матрас, он был весь избитый, это в той спальне тоже там окно. Вот. А потом явилась вот эта моя любимая доктор, она не доктор, значит, да.
Давайте я сейчас это
Конечно,
переведу, да. So what happened next? Because basically the wardrobe covered Tamara and she couldn't escape from her apartment. One of the neighbor came and helped her. And then during the night, the police came to the site, but also rescuers and UNHCR's partner Proliska, they were on the ground. So they installed their tents and they were supporting all the people in need. And Tamara asked for help, and she was provided with some transparent film and wooden sheets to cover broken windows. And of course, she couldn't do it by herself. And the colleagues from Proliska, they came and helped to install all of these materials on the windows. In order to keep the apartments warm, because it was very cold outside. She also received some a lamp because there was electricity cut as well, and a warm blanket. And after that, she met, she's saying like a magician, and she's referring to the psychologist of Proliska, Irina, whom she met a year ago.
Ну да, 4 окна были выбиты, стекол не было деревянных. А потом явилась наша женщина любимая, психолог, да. Вначале, понимаете, когда в этом шоке и человек с тобой разговаривает, ты ничего не слышишь и не понимаешь. Вот. А потом уже, ну, все равно, знаете, как оно вот идет мимо. Вот. А потом, конечно, ее усердие и мое понимание, конечно, ну, вот это вот целый с ней. Она со мной не работает, да. И она так приезжает, и я ездила туда в офис к ней, да. Потом она по телефону мне дает задание. И я вот занимаюсь, могу даже, если можно, предъявить, да. Значит, вот мы это самое, арт-терапия занимаемся, потом вот это нейроупражнение делаю лево-правой рукой, для того, чтобы все-таки я старая женщина, да, ну, в общем-то, вот так еще, да, переводите, да.
So then once I met Irina, you know, I was shocked. And at that very moment, I didn't understand what to do, what I was supposed to do. So Irina, she started working with me. And I think it was, you know, a mutual process. So now it's been a year of our work. And we do a lot. So sometimes she comes to me. Sometimes I go to the office of Proliska here in Dnipro. Sometimes she calls me and gives me some tasks, and Tamara, she showed what they do. So basically, I don't know if you can see them well. And she's mentioning that they have a lot to show. So this is kind of art therapy, which helps her to recover and disconnect from the air raid alert, constant air raid alert. So this is also some kind of neuropsychology, and it helps. It helps Tamara. Пані Тамара, скажіть, будь ласка, то есть уже целый год вы работаете, и вы видите вот какой-то, скажем так, прогресс, да, в том, что
Это
с
вы у
вашим
нее спросите.
состоянием.
Она сказала, что я очень послушна, и сдвиги есть, но пока еще на пятерку не тяну. Ну, стараюсь.
Yeah, Irina is today with us as well, and I asked Tamara, like, do you see any like progress from the psychological states you were right after the attack, and now, since it's been the year of their work? And she says, yeah, that Irina mentioned that she is a very diligent student, but they still have a lot to work on. But what Tamara mentioned, that she's trying and she likes these classes with Irina. So I think this is briefly how we can explain the situation here right now and the importance of the work of psychologists, and not only in psychologists, but in principal protection services, which we can provide to people in Ukraine. So let me say huge thanks to Tamara, who shared her story today with us. Тамара, ну, мистер Анна, мы благодарим вас за то, что вы нам рассказали все, показали. Мы скажем, да, хорошего вечера коллегам.
Ну да, очень хорошо, что вы помогаете нам. Это очень нужна помощь, и моральная, и материальная, и вся помощь, потому что тяжело справиться, особенно когда руины в окне смотришь. Вот, работаешь над собой, конечно, но уже наглядный пример, что завтра будет.
So Tamara is saying that she's very grateful to all of you for the support you are providing to people in Ukraine, because it's really important, and she's trying to move forward. It is difficult because every day she still sees some ruins in the yard after the attack, but she's trying to be positive. So thank you so much. I will give the floor back to Lacey. Have a good evening, colleagues.
Wow, I want to say a huge thank you, truly from the bottom of my heart, to our amazing colleagues on the ground in Ukraine, and to Tamara for sharing your inspiring story. I'd like to ask if Pauline is available to join us again, as I think I have time for just one question. Pauline, we talked a little bit earlier about protection, and Dana shared her insights as well. And so I'm curious to hear from your perspective. How do you measure success in protection work, especially when the situation is constantly evolving?
Thanks, Lacey. I mean, the situation is very, very complex on the ground. Many people may be displaced once, and then displaced again, and then displaced even a third time. They may be affected by a missile strike, a drone attack, like Tamara, who we just met. So the situation is one where people may face a shock today, and then again a few months from now, and then again next year. Nevertheless, I think protection is really about people. It's about helping to restore access to rights, access to services. So for me, success is when people are able to become self-reliant again, when their resilience has been boosted and they're able to really resume their lives, be it after a missile attack in Ukraine, or be it after displacement, when they need to really rebuild again in a new location within the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Pauline. This has been such an amazing webinar. I want to say a huge thank you again to Dana, to Pauline, to Victoria, and especially to Tamara for shedding light on the life-saving protection work that UNHCR conducts on behalf of refugees and internally displaced people. So folks know, this session has been recorded and it will be shared with participants via email. Today, we heard stories from just 2 countries, but there are countless stories of resilience, hope, and survival from every corner of the world. In this 1 hour, we have just scratched the surface. It is truly impossible to do justice to all experiences, but I hope we were able to add some crucial context to some of the work UNHCR has done every day for the past 75 years. When war or persecution forces people to flee their homes, UNHCR will continue to provide life-saving assistance, including food, water, shelter, medical care, and other urgent necessities, saving and sustaining countless lives. But we certainly cannot do it alone. We at USA for UNHCR are especially thankful to this generous community that continues to support our work. Whether it's in Ukraine, Sudan, or dozens of other crises worldwide, UNHCR's protection work is about restoring humanity, one person and one family at a time. I wanted to recognize a question that came in through the chat that was regarding the funding cuts, and I won't sugarcoat my response. UNHCR assesses that the funding cuts in 2025 have led to around 11.6 million people who have been forced to flee being at risk of losing urgently needed assistance this year. The impact of these cuts is already being felt. Displaced families whose reduced financial aid is no longer sufficient to afford food, healthcare, and shelter, refugee and host community students whose schools have been forced to close, and newly displaced people arriving in fragile border areas where reduced operational capacity is preventing rapid relocation to safer locations. We talked a lot about numbers today, but the funding crisis is not just numbers. This is about real people whose lives depend on UNHCR's assistance. Now more than ever, your support is the difference between life and death. So I'd like to invite everyone here to check out the links that are going to be provided in the chat and to join us in our shared vision, which is a world where every person forced to flee can build a better future. This is truly a defining moment. Without urgent action, millions of people will lose access to the protection and aid that they need to survive. So I am asking you to stand with us and to stand with refugees today. Your support can truly save lives. When you use the links in the chat, you can simply learn more about the situations in Sudan and Ukraine. You can also take action by making a generous donation to support UNHCR's life-saving work. Flexible and unearmarked funding is essential. It allows UNHCR to respond immediately where the need is greatest, whether that be war-torn Ukraine, climate-stricken Bangladesh, which we haven't even touched on today, or conflict-ravaged Sudan. And a monthly gift is the most effective way to make a difference for people forced to flee their homes. You can truly save lives and change lives by giving to USA for UNHCR as a compassionate monthly supporter, where you can also be sure that every single day you are helping to bring hope, comfort, and support to the individuals and families who need it the most. And you can also reach out to us to simply learn more about how you can become more involved and make an impact that is personally meaningful to you. We are so proud to provide opportunities to support and amplify refugee voices at USA for UNHCR, whether that's through advocacy, giving generously, or spreading awareness. We all have a collective role to play. So I hope that you have found our time together today to be informative. Please do be on the lookout for additional future virtual engagements from USA for UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, and of course, for the recording from today. Once again, our sincere gratitude to you and to all of our speakers today for joining us. Thank you so very much for being a valued supporter of USA for UNHCR. Thank you.